Well, welcome everybody. It's so wonderful to have you here this evening. So this evening, we're going to talk about the countdown to college, this crucial time for rising seniors. My name is Ann Dolin, and for the last 25 years, my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants have been helping kids to do better in school and to gain acceptance to the college of their choice. This evening, I have somebody really special. I can't think of a better person to talk about this topic with us tonight than Kristin Landis. Kristin, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me, Ann.
So Kristin is a college consultant here with us at Educational Connections, and every day she helps students with the admissions process. She has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Richmond, and she has a law degree from Emory University School of Law in Atlanta. Prior to coming to Educational Connections, Kristin worked at UVA at University of Virginia for 11 years as an evaluator. That means she evaluated over 10,000 applications, in-state, out-of-state, and international candidates. So Kristin, one of the parents in the chat, and thank you so much for putting in your questions or thoughts into the chat this morning, kind of touched on something that I want to make sure that we cover this evening. And that really has to do with the rise in competition. Mm-hmm. So I'd love for you to kind of pick your brain. Sure. What are you seeing in terms of the application volume and really the competition, especially among very competitive schools?
Yeah, absolutely, Ann. I think that's probably on the tip of everyone's tongue right now. I'm sure most of the people on the webinar this evening have friends or they have classmates who have just gone through the process and they heard about how this past year was super competitive and they heard all kinds of scary numbers and such. But the truth is, yes, there has been a rise in applications, no question. Since the pandemic, actually since 2019 until last year, the Common App has actually seen over a 30% rise in applications. So that means not only are there more students applying to schools, but they're also applying to more schools. And just in state, some of the statistics, when I started at UVA back in 2010, we received probably about 24,000 applications. When I left in 2022, there were 52,000 applications. But even this past year, Virginia Tech had a huge rise in applications, seeing around over 40,000 just in early action alone. And then schools outside of the state, like BC, saw a 14% increase this past year. So what does that mean when you have all these applications? It's exactly what you said, Ann. It's just getting a little harder to get into schools. There are just that much more applications and that many more students. So you're seeing acceptance rates and percentages lower and lower. And I'm sure a lot of the people, if they're seniors and their parents of seniors, they've probably been wedded to those scattergrams out there, which I, first of all, will recommend. Let's try not to get too obsessed with those scattergrams because acceptance rates can be misleading. And so there's a lot that goes into an acceptance for a student. And so I would not be too wedded to those acceptance rates. But that said, really highly competitive schools, Ivies, whereas 5-6 years ago, they were seeing 10% acceptance rates, you're now down in the 3-4%. And schools that used to be in like the 20 or 30% acceptance rates are now down in the teens. And what's the reason for this? People are asking, why is this happening so much? And I think there's a number of reasons. I think one of the biggest ones is that we're living in more of a test optional landscape. So students are having the ability to cast wider nets and apply to schools that they wouldn't necessarily have applied to before. Also, since the pandemic, colleges have gotten a lot more well-versed and marketing themselves and having a better online presence. So people are feeling they don't necessarily have to go see a school to apply to it, to get a good feel for the school. And the other thing that you're seeing colleges do really most recently in the last few years is they're really making a very conscious effort to get underrepresented groups in urban areas, first gens, to apply to schools where they necessarily haven't applied before. So that's kind of the landscape we're living in right now.
And thank you for that. So it kind of brings me to the point, if it is competitive, and we're not talking about all schools. Let's preface this by saying there's a lot of schools out there that don't have these really selective rates.
Mhm.
But when we think of the more selective schools, what are they looking for when they evaluate students?
Absolutely. And you're right, Anne, to mention that. First of all, there's well over 2,000 schools, 3,000 schools in this country. And there are lots and lots of schools that have acceptance rates that are much more palatable than hearing 3 and 4%, and that can provide students with wonderful opportunities. So I don't want people to get too nervous out there. So what colleges are looking for? When I worked at UVA and when I was evaluating a student, I would look at them and say, what will this student bring to my university? What contribution can they make both in the classroom and out of the classroom? And there are a number of characteristics that you look for to answer that question. One of them is you want to see that a student has a thirst for knowledge, that they have an intellectual curiosity. And how do you show that in an application? Well, first of all, you hope that students have really pushed themselves in the classes that they've taken. So you want to see that rigor both in the classroom, but out of the classroom. You want to see that they've taken that love of learning and transferred that outside of the classroom. Maybe they've taken a class at a local university, or that they've gotten involved in a book group or taking an interest. It doesn't necessarily have to be academic, but taking that interest and elevating it in many, many different ways by participating in different things that show that that love of learning, whatever it be. It doesn't necessarily have to be an academic subject. Another thing that colleges are looking for, besides that love of learning, is you want to see a drive, an initiative, that students take risks. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be, president of the senior class, although that's fantastic. But you want to see that students have really pushed themselves. Maybe that they started rowing on a crew team, and they maybe not be the best athlete on the crew team, but boy, they've been there every single morning going to practice, and they went to winter conditioning. Or maybe you have a student who struggled in a class, and so they've gone for extra help, or they've really gotten their grade up. So there are lots of different ways to show initiative and drive. And then kind of along with that characteristic is you want to see that students have really kind of persevered. And granted, these students are 16, 17 years old. They don't necessarily, they haven't been subjected to a lot of obstacles in life, although there are those that have. But you can show perseverance in lots of different ways. Just like I said, if let's say a student suffers from ADHD, showing that they've really applied themselves and really pushed themselves despite having that challenge. Or maybe they've, like I said, with a sport or in another way. So just showing that perseverance, that they've really stuck with it, is really important. And then the last thing that I would say that we're looking for is what I alluded to earlier, is making that contribution. And that can be seen in a myriad of different ways. Obviously, leadership, formal leadership, but also informal leadership. Maybe a student mentors a younger sibling, or takes care of siblings in the summer, or has a job. I mean, having a job in any form or fashion is a way to show you're making a contribution in some sort of way. And then the other thing, which is to me is an absolute non-negotiable, is that a student shows some sort of social consciousness, giving back to the community in some way. And again, that can run the gamut from running a service group to just doing a food drive, or volunteering at an organization. So that's a thing that you definitely want to see a student have. Oh, Anne, you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you so much. I had barking dogs in the background. I did myself for a second. When you mentioned ADHD for a second, and sometimes parents will ask, is this something that my child should disclose, or should we kind of keep it hush hush because we're not quite sure how it will be judged?
Sure, absolutely. I actually had a parent last week. They're a student who actually has had some significant learning challenges, and they are very concerned about that. Is there going to be a stigma associated with that if my student, brings that up to a college? And I say, absolutely not. I mean, if that is something that a student feels comfortable with, and that's my number one caveat, if a student feels comfortable sharing challenges that they've had to deal with, by all means, colleges want to hear that. I can't tell you how many nights I sat there literally weeping with college applications, reading students' stories of what students have been through, whether it be dealing with their own identity in some form or fashion, or a learning disability. So if a student feels comfortable sharing it, it just makes them that much more unique, that much more human, and that much more relatable to the evaluator. So yes, I would share if they feel comfortable.
Thanks, Kristin. And that kind of goes along with really showing your personality and how important that is to admissions folks.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that parents and students, and I understand it. We just talked about how competitive it is out there in the environment. So everyone feels that their resumes have to be chock full of high flying activities and tons of different things. And really what college admissions evaluators are looking for is they just want to get to know the individual student, the human. And as I said, everyone has a unique things about them. So what is it about your student, or if students are on the webinar, about themselves that they can just portray to evaluators, because evaluators are humans too. And what they can bring, because you don't want everyone the same. You don't want everyone with tons and tons of accolades in your classroom. You want a variety of all kinds of things. That's what makes it interesting and makes it a collaborative, enriching environment.
So it sounds like really it's strategic, and it's really all about kind of packaging yourself, which is different than when we applied. When we applied, you just kind of wrote down the few things we did, and then you wrote an essay and called it a day.
Right.
But it's really, really different now. It sounds like instead of doing many things, that focusing on a few things that you love to do, that you're passionate about is key. How do you package yourself?
Absolutely, Ann. And I can actually tell you in my years at UVA, when I saw there are 10 entries on the Common App for activities, and when I would see a student who would fill out all 10, I would take a pause, because it is difficult to be heavily invested in 10 different things when you're going to school and you're doing other things. So truly having a few things that you are, that you've really delved deep into is what's most important. And packaging, we use that word, is how we articulate that to universities in our applications. And how is that done? It's seen through a number of things. First of all, the type of courses that your student has taken, that shows what interests they have. 2 is the most obvious, how they spend their time outside of the classroom. What are they passionate about? What makes them tick? The other place you see that is in teacher recommendations or recommendations, people that know them, counselor recommendations. What are they saying about the student? And then the last thing would be in the 5-letter word essay, when that student actually has the opportunity to communicate their unique voice and perspective. And so the package is the elevation of those things that set them apart from the person sitting next to them in their English class or in their AP US history class. That is what the packaging is. And here, that's what I use for my students, is what I meet with a student. I really try to listen, how do you like to spend your free time? What have you been doing? What excites you? Because that's in my head, I'm starting to formulate what that package is going to look like.
And I love that you do that, because I know that some kids come to us and they say, I'm not that unique. I'm kind of average. I'm not really sure what I'm good at. I don't know what I want to major in. How do you help those kids?
And that is okay. More often than not, I hear that, and that is okay. I mean, to expect a 17 or 18 or 16-year-old to know what they want to do with their life already. I'm in my 50s. I still don't necessarily know what I want to do with my life all the time, is a lot to ask of a student. But every person has something to offer. Everyone is unique in their own way. Everyone has something that's special about them. And so it's our job to listen to the student and help them identify what that is and elevate the application.
Yes, Kristin. And I know you're going to talk about that a little bit later, and how you actually get to that with one of our programs or with the software that you use. But let's kind of boil it down to specific strategies for seniors. So for kids that are current juniors or rising seniors, what should they be doing right now? And I know that an upward trajectory is really important. Can you talk a little bit about why
Sure.
that's important?
Absolutely. I mean, right now with all of my juniors, the month of May is when there is an absolute, I know that they're super busy with AP tests and getting ready for finals and projects and spring sports and all that stuff. But it's really important to ask for teacher recommendations this month before you get out of school. There are some teachers that put a cap on the number of recommendations that they will write. And if you love your English teacher and you have a great relationship with them and you go to them in September or even in August or try to track them down over the summer and they're like, I'm sorry, I've already reached my cap. So May is a time that I ask all my students to ask for 2 teacher recommendations from 11th grade teachers. And you definitely want one of them to be a core teacher. And you want one of those teachers to be in an area that you're interested in. And so that's something that you do absolutely right now. And then with regards to that upwards trajectory, it's so funny that we actually have this webinar this evening because I met with a student earlier today who's a rising senior. And I met with them for the first time. And we were reviewing her senior program. And she's taking gourmet foods, which is a great class. I get it. It could be super fun, but she's really interested in business. And she's taken all these business classes through her 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. And then she kind of took her foot off the gas in 11th and 12th. And I was like, well, your school offers kind of this culmination of this advanced marketing class, this strategic marketing class. Why aren't you taking it? You've taken all these marketing classes. And she's like, oh, I didn't really think about it. So I said, this is the time to take that class to really show, first of all, I think you're going to enjoy it and you're going to get a lot out of it, but also to just show that continuity. And then I have another student that I was talking to earlier this week, and they're like, well, I don't really know about my senior program. And I said, this is the time that you really should be stretching yourself. You've done really well in your other years. So why don't you take that AP class that you maybe were not, a little more tentative about taking when you were in one of the younger grades? So your senior program should actually be your most difficult program. That's that upwards trajectory that we're talking about, Ann, that we want to see.
I think that some kids come to you and thinking, oh, my senior year, nobody's really going to see those grades or those courses. I'll just kind of slack off and make this an easier year. It sounds like that's not a good idea.
Definitely not a good idea. I can honestly tell you the senior program is the most important program. The rigor of the senior year is the most important. And if you apply early action or early decision to a school, you're right, Ann, they won't see those grades, but they are going to see the classes that you took. And if you are a student who's going to apply regular decision to schools, and we're going to talk about what strategically when you decide to do one or the other, those mid-year grades are super important because just like in an upward trajectory of your program rigor, you want to see an upward trajectory of your grades if you haven't done as well in 9th and 10th grade or 11th grade.
And it also is true that kids can still change their classes now. They
Absolutely.
can still make some tweaks.
Absolutely.
All right. So we talked about that upwards trajectory. What about testing?
Yeah.
How important is that in this test optional environment?
Right. Exactly. So over 80% of colleges are still test optional. So, that is the reason that students are applying to so many schools. And it's fabulous to be able to have that opportunity to apply to a school that you may not have applied to before. But especially with highly selective schools, testing is an area where you can set yourself apart from that student that's sitting next to you. If your student has done well or hasn't taken the test yet, this is the time. And I know you're going to show Ann when the next tests are, but this is the time when they're getting out of school where they can prep for the tests, either the ACT or the SAT, and they can take them. And then if they do well on them, depending on the schools that they are applying to, you can use that and that will add another dimension to your application. And we're very strategic in terms of what schools we submit scores to and schools we don't submit scores to. And we here at EC help students decide when they should and when they shouldn't. I can't tell you how many times when I was at UVA, when we went to a test optional landscape, that a student would submit their scores and I would see them and I was like, oh, why did you submit your scores? Because now I have to consider it in my decision-making process. Whereas if you hadn't submitted your score, it was no harm, no foul. And it wasn't going to have been a factor, but now it is.
So you mentioned the SAT and ACT, and what's also important to note is that students don't need to take both. Every college in the country, even if they're test optional, they do not have a preference. So it is, if your child decides to take a test and decides to prepare, it's in their best interest to save time and effort to really find that test and they probably know this from prior testing, that they want to go with and really prep and just take that one test. So Kristin, as you mentioned, here are the upcoming test dates. Whoops, sorry, here we go. So these are SAT and ACT dates. And as you can see, there are test dates that are coming in the late summer. So even if you take a late summer in August, a July, August, September, October, you can still apply for early action or early decision with these tests. Mm-hmm. And because we are talking about seniors that have a limited amount of time, really having individualized test preparation will help them achieve their scores if they want faster. And that means one-to-one. So if we can help you with that, we're happy to support your child. You can scan this QR code and it will take you to our test preparation page where you can learn about our programs and see if this avenue is right for your student. But we encourage students, if you're going to have a score, you really want to make it the best score it can be. So if you come in, and you have an ACT score of, by the way, the top score is 36. Let's say you come in at a 28, but you could potentially be a 31. That 31 looks so much better on your application than that 28. So it's in your student's best interest to prepare for the test and really put their best foot forward, because it's likely that there's, on your list of schools, there are some schools that you would definitely submit a score to.
Absolutely. And there are schools, and we didn't mention this, but there are schools where testing is required. If you are applying to any school in the state of Florida, state school testing is required. If you're applying to Tennessee, testing is required. There are a number of schools out there, MIT, Purdue, UNC, Georgia Tech, where testing is required. So, it's good it's just another feather in your cap. So I do recommend, especially with summer when students have more time, to really give it their best shot with testing. And then you can make that decision whether or not you're going to submit scores.
Thanks, Kristin. So let's move on and talk about this summer, that summer sizzle. Tell us about it.
I like to call it the summer sizzle. I was trying to think of a cute name because, I think students think, I just had this really tough year, my junior year. It is a very rigorous year for students. I'm going to take my foot off the gas this summer. And actually, just like your senior program is the most important, your summer before your senior year is a really important time. A lot of times students are now at an age where they can get a job, and getting a job is a wonderful thing. I had a student the other day and I said, okay, well, so, what are your thoughts for the summer? And he said, well, I think I'm going to apply to either Target or Harris Teeter. And he stopped and he looked at me. And I think he was waiting for me to say, oh, you can't do that, or that's not fancy enough. And I was like, fantastic. I think that's fabulous. Having a job at a fast food restaurant or a grocery store or anywhere, pizza place, it shows initiative, it shows responsibility, it shows maturity, it shows the ability to effectively collaborate with others, which we're looking for when people are applying to schools, because we want students in a classroom that are collaborative and are good, efficient, effective team members. So a job is a wonderful thing. It's also the opportunity to elevate and explore those interests that we talked about. Now, there are a lot of programs out there in the summer for students that are really selective, and we've missed those deadlines for a lot of those internships or other programs are now gone. But there's no despair, because there are lots of other opportunities there. We really want to see that the student is focusing and elevating their interests. I have a student who is interested in medicine. And so I said, okay, how about shadowing a doctor? Let's reach out to a number of physicians in your area and see if you can shadow a doctor. And how about volunteering at the Red Cross this summer, doing some blood drives? That shows an interest in your area. I have another student who's passionate about climate change. I was talking to them the first time the other day, and they're like, I'm very, very passionate about climate change. I'm like, well, that's fantastic. So we started talking, and they just happened to be their local House of Representative person is very, very involved in climate change. And so they're reaching out to them to see if they would be interested in speaking at a march that they want to hold in next fall. So they're going to spend this summer planning with another friend to do this event in the fall. I think that's fabulous. I think that's super compelling to a college to see something like that. I have another student who, their parents are both working. So in the summer, they have to watch their younger siblings, which is also where one may say, well, they're not filling up their resume with all kinds of things. I think that is incredibly compelling when you are responsible for taking care of younger siblings. And so they're also someone who's really interested in reading. So we talked about, hey, how about you and your siblings doing a little summer book group together? So once a week, you and your siblings read a book and you can talk about it. And I mean, it's kind of just a fun thing for them, but also something that elevates her interest. So even though she's tied to the house this summer, it also allows her to perpetuate that interest. So again, this summer, super important to really that package that we talked about to be elevating those interests that your senior, or if seniors are on, that they have.
Kristin, right now we're in May, and before you know it, applications will be due.
Yes.
What about these deadlines coming up?
Sure. So we call it the application countdown. And so with all of my juniors that I'm working with right now, our goal is to get as much done this summer as possible. Obviously, I want students to have a downtime and have a good summer and go on vacation and do those things that they're interested in that we talked about earlier. But it's also a time to really hone in on what you're looking for in a college experience. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then also to actually start working on the applications. So May is a month that I want my students to be focusing on teacher recommendations. And that involves not only asking teachers, but once they're out of school and out of tests, we make sure that they have a resume that's a very detailed resume with the things that they do that we can present to their recommenders. So recommenders can write a very personalized, detailed, and robust recommendation for them. So resumes is one thing that we work on over the summer. Some high schools in Northern Virginia have what are called brag sheets. Sometimes they call them senior packets. That's where the guidance counselor actually presents the students with a number of questions. There's also a parent one for a lot of schools. So parents, be on the lookout if your school is one of those that has that. And we work on brainstorming answers. Some of them are like, if you had to name yourself in 3 adjectives, what would they be? So I help students with those things because, again, you want the guidance counselor to write a detailed and personal, robust recommendation. And then June is a month that I like to call Common App Month. So that's where I work with my students in getting their account open, starting to fill out the Common App, the activities portion, which you have a very limited amount of time, space to say a lot about what you're doing. So we spend a lot of time on that. And then, of course, we do a tremendous amount of brainstorming topics for essays and start writing their essays as much as we can. So when they go back in the fall, I want seniors to enjoy their senior year. They also are going to have a rigorous schedule and have their activities. So as much we can get done over the summer is what we try to do.
I love that. Then it's not, weighing you down come fall. So finding the right fit is super important. And whoops, sorry, that picture got a little bit big there. But finding that right fit and being open to possibilities is important because sometimes kids think of brand name schools or they have to do things just like this, but that is not true. There's really great fits out there for all kinds of kids.
Absolutely. And we, and you and I spoke on a webinar a couple months ago about if you think your student is average, which no student is average, and it's important to find that fit. And so people hear this, you hear about this match, and what that means is for when you're looking at colleges, matches would be those dreaded scattergrams that we talked about earlier, where your students testing if they choose to submit, and then their GPA, where they kind of fall within a school. And if you want a balanced list, you want some schools that are considered targets. So your student would be where the majority of applicants are accepted in that same kind of GPA land. And then reaches. And I say to everyone that if a school has a 12% or lower acceptance rate, it's a reach for everyone. And then what people call safeties, I like to call them most likelies, because college admissions is not an exact science, but those schools where your students' GPA and testing, if they choose to submit, would be higher than the percentage of the kind of average percentage of students who are accepted to that school. So we look for those balanced lists, and we definitely look at match, but really the fit, it's all about the fit. If we have to do a little song, it's really about the fit. That's really the most important. This is your student's journey. This is their college experience. They're going to spend 4 years there. And so it's very important to find a school that they feel comfortable in, that offers the opportunities that they're interested in, that they have the ability to experience both personal and academic growth at.
Thanks, Kristin. We have another slide problem here. So I know that this was the importance of something important.
Yeah, it's the importance of research. Research is super important, because just like you talked about, Ann, everyone has the same schools on the tip of their tongues. Everybody's talking about the same 20 or 30 schools. And there are so many schools out there that are wonderful, that students can have a fabulous experience at. And so summer's a wonderful time to be doing that research. There's so much out there to learn about schools, looking at the things that you're interested in and finding schools that have those things. I call it your ski slope. I say to students, it's your ski slope. And what I mean by that is I have had students in the past where, let's just take skiing, for example, is very important to them. It's a hobby that they're really interested in. They want to be able to continue doing for those 4 years. Do you pick a school based on whether they have skiing nearby? Absolutely not. But if that's something that's important to you, it's something to consider. So if you want to know where the best skiing is near a university, you ask me. Other things are, I had a student where going to a school where they had really great sports and they could watch the sports on TV, super important to them. Is that a reason for picking a school? Absolutely not. But if that's something that's important to you, being able to, picking schools that have that as part of one of their components when you're thinking about schools is important. And then if we think about the more serious things, I have students who are interested in a bunch of different things. So finding a school that has a lot of academic freedom, where they just necessarily don't have as many prerequisites, core courses that you have to take. Brown University is one that has a tremendous amount of academic freedom. That's really important to them. So finding schools that have that, so doing research and finding that is something that we do during the summer. I have another student who wants to go directly to the business school. They don't want to be taking English classes. They don't want to be taking history classes. They want to go straight into the business school. So there are colleges that have direct business school admit programs that you apply straight from high school into their business schools. So doing that research and seeing what programs are out there that fit what you're looking for is really important. So that's the importance of research.
And I know you always encourage kids to really think outside the box.
Absolutely. We talked about that earlier. We said there are so many schools out there that some students, they never even think about. And it always warms my heart when I recommend a school to a student and they're kind of, they're like, I don't know about that. And then they do some research and then they go visit it. And I have a couple this year already who are actually going to that school. So it really warms my heart when they have thought outside that box and then they end up at that school. So here's an example. Babson is a school that many people haven't heard about, but they have probably one of the best entrepreneurship programs in the world, not only the country, but in the world. Musical theater. People don't necessarily know that Elon in North Carolina and Ithaca College and the University of Cincinnati all have top 10 programs. I had a student who was applying for aerospace engineering. And so they thought Virginia Tech was the place to be. And they wanted to go to Virginia Tech, but they got into the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. And they are a top 10 aerospace engineering program. And they actually didn't get into Virginia Tech. And so they're going to Illinois and they are ecstatic. They went out and they loved it. So really don't limit yourself. This is a time to really expand your horizons and test the waters.
Sounds like casting a wide net
Yes.
initially is a good idea. What about the strategic part of applications?
Yeah, we talked about that. We kind of alluded to it earlier. I mean, the trend now is that more and more people are applying early to school, and whether that be early decision or early action. And I'll just explain the difference really quickly. Early decision is binding. It is you apply to one school, and your guidance counselor, the parent, and the student all sign a contract. So if you get into that school, then you have to go to that school. And the deadlines are normally November 1st for early decision. Early action is becoming incredibly popular. It used to be where students didn't necessarily take advantage of it. We're now in a situation where some schools are seeing 60 to 70% of their students applying early action. They also, some of the Southern schools have an October 15th deadline, but most of them are a November 1st deadline. And students are applying early action. I can tell you Virginia Tech had over 40,000 students apply early action this past year. So it's becoming increasingly popular. So deciding when to apply early action or early decision or regular decision is strategic, and it differs per school. Some early decision schools, schools that have early decision, will accept over half their class in early decision. So it's just a numbers game. You have a better chance. If you're a strong candidate, you have a better chance of getting an early decision than you would if you applied early action. If you're a student who didn't do as well as you feel like you could have done, that maybe your grades don't necessarily reflect your aptitude in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, then we talked about earlier, you're going to want those mid-year, that first semester senior grades. And so you will apply regular decision to schools, which usually have a January 1 or a February 1st or a later application deadline, so that those mid-year grades will count.
Kristin, in addition to seeing trends and lots of kids shifting towards early action and early decision, we're also seeing unprecedented trends in how kids are producing essays, especially in the era of Chat GPT.
Yes.
What are you seeing in admission trends?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of wild when you, Ann is very well versed on this Chat GPT, but when you hear about what this program can do in writing an essay, it's pretty incredible. So college admissions offices are definitely really watching this and paying attention to it. So I do have to say, I did a bunch of research myself on it and saw that while ChatGPT is getting very good at writing essays, the detection software of other companies are also getting very good at it. There's a lot of money to be made in this. So I don't know if necessarily writing a college, weighing your college admissions decision on this being the opportunity that you do an AI essay is probably not the smartest time, because you're going to take that chance that maybe that school does have detection software and you're going to get caught, and then your chances are gone. So I think that's something it's a very, very dangerous game. And I think universities are going to get better and better at figuring it out. Actually, I saw an article, Business Insider and Forbes magazine did a test. They took two essays, a Common App essay and a supplemental essay for college, and had Chat GPT write the essay. And they gave it to a bunch of college admissions officers. And while they couldn't tell that it was AI written, they did have a lot of critique over the essays, that they were somewhat rote, that they were somewhat simplistic in the language used, and they lacked a bunch of kind of empathy and emotion. So you are taking a chance with that. Colleges are also looking at other ways to evaluate students. There are a number of universities now that have introduced a voluntary video introduction. Schools like George Mason and Brown and Tufts and Washington University in St. Louis have implemented this, where you can submit a video introduction. So looking at other ways besides essays to kind of look at students. And there was pardon me, I wanted to go back to one other thing I forgot to mention about being strategic that's really important. And that's also alludes to the importance of research. is that the schools you apply to, also what major you say that you are intending to do, also is very important. That you know, especially for larger public universities, because acceptance rates vary tremendously on whether you're applying for their computer science program, or you're applying for their drama program, or you're applying for their College of Arts and Sciences. And it's not always, people think the STEM ones are the most competitive. That's not necessarily true. It depends on the school and what area of that school. The percentages can change so much. So a school like UCLA, their nursing program has a 1% acceptance rate. You wouldn't know that, right? But if you do your research, you would. Whereas their humanities, their College of Arts and Sciences has like a 9% acceptance rate. So another thing to consider when you're applying to schools.
Lots of things to think about, Kristin.
Lots of things to think about.
Thank you for that. You've shared so many great strategies with us. And if Kristin or one of our other college counselors can help your child, we'd love to talk to you. So Erin Ebert is our director of college counseling, and she talks to parents all day long about their kids and the needs of their kids. She's worked with me for 13 years, and she's well versed in admissions and can talk to you about helping your rising senior finish up their applications, making sure they have a balanced list, and helping them to stand out. And she can also talk to you about younger students if you have a younger child. And you can scan this QR code. It will take you to her calendar, and you can schedule an appointment with Erin. All right. So, Kristin, I would love to end on really the fact that there is a college for everybody.
Absolutely. We've been saying this since day one. There is absolutely a college for everyone. And this time, especially for seniors and for senior parents, the noise has started. I'm sure it started earlier this year. It will continue to get louder and louder and elevate. And so I say to all my students and to my parents, like, be confident in your journey. There is a school for you. Success is defined differently for lots of different people. College, the experience of college is what you make of it. There are lots of wonderful courses and professors and facilities and opportunities at all schools. So it truly is what the student makes of it. So I try to have students and parents give yourself a little grace and be confident in your journey and knowing that there will be a place for you for sure.
That is the definite truth. Well, Kristin, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And we're going to go to Q&A in just a second. So parents, it was so great to have you with us this evening. I also wanted to let you know that we have some other webinars coming up in our Roadmap to College series. On May 23rd, we have our other college consultant, Lisa Gastaldi, coming. And this is for younger students, what rising 8th, 9th, and 10th graders can be doing now to stand out later. 7 o'clock on the 23rd. And then Kristin's coming back with us on June 12th. And she'll be talking about the rising junior cohort and what they should be doing to rise above the competition. All right. So as I mentioned, in just a second, we're going to go to Q&A. I want to let you know, after you exit tonight, there will be a survey. And if you would be so kind as to complete that survey for us, that would be super helpful as we plan future engagements. All right. So if you have a question, throw it in the chat. And it looks like there's lots of things in the chat. So let me go back and see what we have from earlier today. And let's see. How do you let your child be led? How do you lead your child but not micromanage your child? That's an important question. How have you found that parents can really help to navigate the journey with their child without doing the work, Kristin?
Isn't that kind of the challenge of being a parent in general, whether you're doing it for college, applying for colleges, or just life in general? I think it's a delicate balance between guiding your student, providing advice, and then also letting them, this is their journey, and letting them make their decisions. And so when I work with students and parents, I always start my first session with them saying to the student, you are driving this train. This is your experience and your journey. I will gently guide you. I will gently push you if I have to, but truly, this is your journey, and you need to empower them and listen to them.
Melanie asks, what do you do if your child's grades have gone down in 11th grade? The same number of challenging classes in 9th and 10th, but not really great grades at the junior year. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I would want to delve a little deeper into the reason behind the dip in grades. Sometimes there are compelling reasons why a student has not done as well, and especially if they've done well before, there may be a reason behind that, and that's the beauty of the additional information section of the Common App. I spent a tremendous amount of time with students who have. I mean, life happens and things happen, and as I said, college admissions evaluators are human. And so that is a wonderful area to be able to articulate when, maybe there's been some reasons. Maybe you had a long-term substitute, or you had a bunch of different changes in teachers in that calculus AB class. And that's why it was difficult for you to grasp the material because there was so much disruption going on. And those are things where we explain it. But for this parent and this student in particular, that's where your first semester senior year would be really important to be able to show, hopefully that student, whatever the challenges they had, they will be able to overcome and then have a strong first semester, just like they did in their earlier high school years.
Thank you, Kristin. One parent asks that, it seems like there are more applications, but there aren't more kids. Why is this occurring? Is it that students are just submitting more applications? And about how many applications is each student submitting? How many should they submit?
So it's really twofold. There are more kids and there are more applications. So as we talked about earlier this evening, there are the students who didn't necessarily apply to colleges before, those underrepresented groups who we were talking about, who are applying to schools, first gens. And then because of this test optional landscape, and because there's so much more information out there on the internet, people are so much more well-informed, students are applying to more schools than they were before. And so, it really depends on the student. You will probably hear that people say somewhere between 7 and 12 schools you should apply to. My guidance to my students is I am going to ask you not to apply to any school that you wouldn't go to. It's a waste of your time and your money to apply to those schools. So that's why research is so important ahead of time. And then we also talked about the early decision. That is an option for many students when they would only apply to one school.
Christy asks, do the recommendations have to just come from the 11th grade teachers? If your child had a great connection with a teacher from 10th grade, would that be appropriate?
It really depends on the circumstance. If that teacher was, let's say hypothetically, your student is really, they're going to apply to engineering school, and that was a engineering principal's teacher, and they have an amazing connection with them, and that teacher also knows them from the robotics team or from something outside of school. Yes, I would definitely ask that teacher if they can provide a really detailed and personal recommendation. But the rule of thumb is, if you don't have that type of scenario, then I would want a core 11th grade teacher. And that also depends, again, if you're interested in STEM subjects, I would definitely want a math or a science teacher. If your student is wanting to apply in foreign language, then I would want a foreign language teacher. So definitely one core teacher and then another teacher. And usually the 11th grade year is preferable. And you'll see colleges are accepting less and less recommendations. Schools that used to accept 3, I was at UVA, we used to accept 3 recommendations. Now they're down to 1 with an option of another. So because schools are have so many applications, they're starting to have to limit the number of recommendations that they allow.
That makes sense. Karen says that her son has enough credits to graduate with an advanced diploma, and he wants to have this free block in his schedule. Should he keep it free, or should he put in another elective?
I hate to say it depends. As I'm saying, it's really case specific. I would like to see the other classes that he's taking. If he is taking quite a rigorous program, And if he's taking courses in areas that he's interested in, that kind of elevate his narrative and his package, then I don't see a problem with a free period or an early release. But I would definitely want to make sure that that is balanced with these other important things.
I have a number of questions about whether or not to submit scores and the strategy behind that. So in general, parents want to know, how do you know when you should submit a score? What is the strategy around whether to submit or not?
Right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you'll see, sometimes people say, well, if your student score falls in the 50% range or higher of students that are admitted to that school, then you should submit. I don't agree with that. I think that your student has to have more in the 75 to 80% of the students who are admitted to that school. Their score would need to be in that range or higher, because again, in a test optional landscape, you want to really make sure you're submitting a score to a school that's really going to add to your application, not detract in any way from it. And this also goes to AP exams. I don't think people necessarily realize that you can pick which AP exam scores you submit to schools and which you don't. And so there's also very much a strategy involved with that.
How many times should kids take an SAT or ACT?
Well, I think you can probably answer that better than I can, Ann.
Well, I would say, most of our students will take the test 2 or 3 times max. Usually after that, you don't get a tremendous amount of return. So in general, what the statistics say is that kids score their highest score in the spring of their junior year. And for that reason, if your child hasn't taken a test, doing so soon is ideal. If they're going to take a fall test, I would encourage them to practice throughout the summer instead of, going hardcore in classes, final exams, and then doing nothing for 2 months and then taking a test. They may not see their best results. So if they're going to take a fall test, they should be preparing over the summer for that test date. Let's see. How do colleges view dual enrollment classes versus APs?
So again, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on where you go to school. If your high school weighs dual enrollment the same as they do AP classes, then it's equivalent. If your school gives an extra bump for AP over DE classes, then the AP is going to be more rigorous. So you need to look at your school's, it's the school profile. You can either get it from the guidance office or you can find it on the internet. It's called the secondary school report. Also, every single college gets those from the high school, and the evaluators are become well versed in the curriculum that's offered at that school, the profile of that school, because you have to remember that your student, or if a student's on, you as a student are being evaluated against your classmates. It wouldn't be fair to evaluate the program of a student who's going to Yorktown High School to a student that's going to St. Stephen's St. Agnes to a student who's going to a high school down in Appalachia in Virginia. You have to compare apples to apples, and so program to program.
A couple questions about activities. One parent said her son is busy with practice all summer, so it's really hard, football practice, so it's really hard to add even more activities. What do you do when a student is already taxed?
I can't tell you how many students I have, a number who are athletes. And so I know, and the same thing goes with band, because marching band practice is all of August. So I know students are really busy. So for a couple of my athletes, I've said, hey, I know you've got football conditioning all summer long, and then you're also on the travel soccer team. How about the thought of maybe mentoring a younger player, maybe holding a clinic, an informal clinic, the skills clinic that some of the other players can come to? Or how about having a used sports equipment drive where you've got a captive audience with your team? Why don't you ask everyone to bring their old lacrosse sticks, and then you guys can donate that to a local middle school? So there are ways to weave things in with things that students are already doing.
Allison says, is my child at a disadvantage applying from a top public high school where it's harder to stand out?
I don't think a student is at a disadvantage, because if you're going to a school with a really stellar reputation, I'll take Thomas Jefferson High School, a charter school in Northern Virginia that I'm sure most people on the webinar are familiar with. Super, super rigorous curriculum, classes that no other high schools offer. So at a school like that, as I said, the student profile, the school profile, colleges are going to know that school. They're going to know the type of classes they offer, the type of students that come out of that school. And so they will adjust accordingly.
Kathy says, if you apply early decision, does that mean you won't be offered any scholarships that maybe you would have gotten if you applied regular decision?
Not necessarily. I mean, there is the risk at times when you apply early decision to a school, because you won't know your financial aid package at the time you apply. So there is one way to get out of an early decision contract, is if you don't receive the financial aid package that allows you to be able to go to that school. So there is that caveat to get out for that reason.
Sharon asks, how do you find out the acceptance rates for particular majors?
So again, research, the importance of research. That's the beauty of the internet. Not every school publishes those things, but you can, through a good amount of research in the school's websites, on the other sites on the internet, find some of that information.
And Sandy says, are there lists of schools that have associate's degrees? Maybe the student isn't quite ready for a four-year college right now.
Absolutely. I'm all about a non-traditional path. And so associate's degrees are at community colleges. So, going to a community college is a wonderful experience if a student isn't ready necessarily to commit financially and just in general for a four-year university. And so that's a wonderful segue before either stopping after the associate's degree or applying to a four-year university. The beauty about Virginia, for those people who are from Virginia on this webinar, is that there is the guaranteed admission agreement in the state of Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so that means that if you have a certain GPA and you take certain classes at the community college that you go to, then every public university in the Commonwealth has to accept you if you meet those requirements for your last 2 years. It's a wonderful way to get into a Virginia Tech, a JMU, a UVA that you may not have gotten in, a William & Mary, if you wouldn't have gotten into otherwise.
Absolutely. It's a very strategic path forward. So Kristin, thank you. We are out of time. If I didn't get to your question, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll make sure it gets answered. My email is Ann, A-N-N, @ectutoring.com. It was a pleasure to see you tonight, as always. Thank you for your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you.
And thank you, parents, for being here this evening. Don't forget about that survey that will pop up momentarily. I hope everybody has a great evening, and I wish you and your rising senior all the very best for the remainder of this year and this summer. Take care, everybody, and bye-bye.